Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Let's check in with Stacy.
Hey, Max. Well, one of the things we've been warning about was the Thucydides trap, and that's the rising power overtakes the declining power. And of the last 18 times, I think it's like 16 have been very, let's say, aggressive. Like they haven't ended so well. And looking at the Thucydides trap coming real as we see the interactions between the Biden administration and the Chinese delegations around the world, especially in terms of trade policy. Last week the U.S. officials said that China was being aggressive, seeking economic domination, which just sounds like capitalism, right? Like they're providing goods and services that people want, and this is considered now economic domination. So I'm going to read this tweet from a former diplomat from Portugal. And when he looked at what happened at the Alaska summit, what his review of the situation was, especially in terms of U.S. Secretary of State Blinken. It just seems that Blinken was not really prepared and was taken by surprise. This is not 2000 or even 2010. Outcome was not great, with U.S. projecting the meekest of images. And it's a still of from Chinese television of senior diplomat, U.S. to be the one to suffer if it suppresses China. And you see their trade negotiator saying, didn't you believe in democracy? Because I guess the U.S. officials kicked the media out at some point.
Blinken got caught blinking. He got caught in the headlights. He was a deer caught in the headlights, old Blinken. Yeah, this was remarkable. I don't remember any kind of tete-a-tete like this in diplomatic circles. I've been an observer of American politics for darn near 60 years. I don't remember this kind of slap in the face. It was kind of like a Quentin Tarantino movie. It was like, the U.S. diplomat Blinken was getting, manhandled pretty soundly by the Chinese counterpart. And the spin that came afterward from the U.S. press was, our heroic diplomats saved the day and this type of thing. It's really, it is the Thucydides trap writ large. So I guess unlike previous Thucydides traps, you mentioned 18 of them, this would be the first one that we get in real-time Twitter version of it. We're going to see it unfold in real time on social media. So this will be a unique in the transition of one empire to another, from the American empire to the Chinese empire. We're going to see this in real time played out on social media. This is the unique bit about it.
Well, speaking of watching it play out on social media, of course, just hours after this public humiliation, the President of the United States fell not once, not twice, but 3 times climbing the stairs to Air Force One. So, it's a little bit bad timing for the president to start falling down in public. But, as well, Thucydides traps are the reason partly why we even have such thing called diplomacy. Diplomacy used to be not for your allies, but for your enemies, so as to avoid conflict and avoid especially going bankrupt and losing all your gold. Obviously, now we don't have a system like that, so diplomacy, they feel, is no longer needed. But nevertheless, the art of diplomacy was developed heavily. The French were very good at it. French was the language of diplomacy, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, French is the language of diplomacy because it's impossible to say anything specific in French. It's always, no matter what, vague, and it has multiple interpretations because they say it's the langue de bois, the language of the woods. So it's all little chirpings and gestures and mouth contortions. You could say the exact same thing with a different contortion of your lips and mean something completely different.
Right. So, nevertheless, this is the Thucydides trap being made real. It gets real. And we're also seeing the Cantillon effect get real. And that's in the data that the Fed itself provides. And yet when they do Fed speak, they'll say that they're not causing the Cantillon effect, or if they are, it's just a little bit. Those who get the money first, i.e. the bankers and the elite, the very wealthy, they benefit from the free money, essentially, they get it at 0%. By the time it trickles down to people buying houses, it's 3.5%. And then to credit cards, it's up to 18%. So Jerome Powell in Wall Street Journal op-ed, I truly believe that we, and then Wolf Richter adds, the rich, will emerge from this crisis stronger and better as we, Wolf Richter adds, the rich, have done so often before. So all you have to do is look at the data. But in the op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, Fed Chair Jerome Powell rationalized and defended the Fed's ultra-radical, previously unthinkably monstrous, and super fast bailout of asset holders starting a year ago, when within 3 months, the Fed created $3 trillion and purchased assets with them and created the biggest media hoopla about these purchases and many more trillions in future purchases in order to inflate asset prices further and make asset holders immensely rich. It was a huge success. Asset prices nearly across the board surged way past the levels before the crisis, and those holding them got a lot richer very fast.
Yeah, let me give you 50 years of American history in 30 seconds. 1971, U.S. closes the gold window. We enter a period of pure fiat money. Then we have Reagan deregulating in the 80s to make sure that the people who control the fiat money can engage in Cantillon effect and gap the wealth and income spread to unheard of levels. Then we have Michael Saylor within the last 24 months announced that the central banks are out of control, and he and his fellow CEOs are going to launch a speculative attack against the central banks by borrowing at the 0% and buying Bitcoin. Flash forward to next year, US dollars collapse 50%. Bitcoin holders now rule the world, and Jay Powell is working for Coinbase.
I get it. Well, the data that they show is pretty remarkable. Just look at the chart. That's all you need to see, really. It's called Wealth Disparity Blows Out, according to the Fed, their own data. Total wealth by wealth category in trillions. So the top 10% own $85.6 trillion in wealth. The next 50 to 90 percentile own $34.8 trillion. And the bottom 50% own $2.5 trillion. But you can really see in that top line, the top 10%, most of it, over half of it, is actually in the top 1%. But you see that anytime, that's the 2008 dip, anytime it dips, the Fed, that's what the Fed seems to be responding to, is anytime their wealth even slightly declines and closes that gap a little bit, well, the Fed goes berserk and starts money printing, and that is the Cantillon effect.
All right, let me just explain. The left side of the political equation has to offset the money printing something called minimum wage. So these two things go counter to each other. When the Fed raises the money supply, as they've done by hundreds of percentage points, minimum wage should rise. If minimum wage were keeping up, let's say, with gold over the past 50 years, minimum wage in America right now would be $50 an hour. $50 an hour is the correct hourly wage to keep up with what the Fed is doing. Remarkably, when these Democrats got into office, so they own all three branches of government, and they had raised the minimum wage on their number one agenda item, they totally puked. They totally choked. And instead, they did typical Democratic thing. They decided, you know what, we're actually more interested in being conservative, money-grubbing GOPers. So that's what we're going to do. And they're really doing a great job. AOC is the new Ronald Reagan. Thank you, AOC.
He breaks down even further the wealth disparity per capita. So if America is 330 million population, then 1% equals 3.3 million people, and 50% equals 165 million people. And so per capita, at those levels, wealth equals assets minus debt. So the wealth of the top 1% in America is $11,700,814 per person. That's up by 1.2 million from the fourth quarter of 2019. The wealth of the bottom 50% is $15,065, and that's up 2,851. So from Q4 2019 to Q4 2020, the wealth disparity between the 1% and the bottom 50% ballooned by $1.1 million per person. So yes, like you're saying, they're saying we have to give these checks to the people and we're doing good, we're doing good. In the meantime, first of all, they're not even looking at what the Fed does.
No.
But all those other programs needed to be created, and the lobbyists contact the Congress people and make sure this happens. Okay, they say, we'll let you give $1,400 to a schlub, the bottom 50%, but you got to give me 1.1 million for that. Like
exactly.
So
one
that's
for you, 10 for me.
Yeah.
Or one for you, 100 to me. Look, the poor people in America have no representation in government. That's the problem. There's nobody in government that represents people who are not part of the multimillionaire lobbying class, who work for banks, who print money for themselves, to the Cantillon effect. Unless you're printing money for yourself and gaining from the Cantillon effect, you have nobody in government representing you in America. Not a single congressperson, not a single senator, nobody in the White House represents you. You are on your own. Are you having fun? I knew you would. Buy Bitcoin for 10 years like we've been saying, and you too would have 10, 15, $20 million, even if you started with $5,000 or $6,000. But, come, easy go, right?
So again, the Cantillon effect gets real. We're seeing it in the actual data provided by the person in charge of the Cantillon effect spigot. They're the ones printing the money, printing the credit, and they're the ones counting the assets. So what the Fed finds is that when they count this wealth of the bottom 50%, and their data shows that the bottom 50% have an average wealth of $15,065 per person, well, over half of that, how they count wealth, is actually not wealth. They're depreciating assets like cars, dishwashers, furniture, smartphones, and other consumer durables. That gets counted in there. So that on average is actually 8,920 of their 15,000 in wealth. So it's actually not wealth. It's not something they could, borrow against or something like that. It's not like property or bonds or anything like that. So
no, they're consumer durables, which have a depreciation rate of, 100%, and you take them out to the trash and you hope you don't have to pay to dump them.
Yeah, exactly. So Wolf Richter concludes that if asset prices surge by 20%, and that's what happens with all of this money printing, we've seen across the board all asset prices surge, the bottom 50% would pocket just $1,228, while someone worth $2 billion would pocket $400 million. So that's it's like a trap, like the Thucydides trap. It's a trap. That Cantillon effect is a trap. We're at a point where you can't get there from here. Like we can't get out of this situation.
Hey, I was on Jimmy Dore's show explaining this in great detail. Check it out on YouTube. I did a good job. I'll be back there soon to catch up. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to return to Dan Collins. Dan, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Hey, Max, good to be back.
Right. So we always come to you for our insight into what's happening in China. You've been reading the Mandarin language news for insight into the extraordinary change in the U.S.-China relationship over the past week, the Alaska summit. What on earth happened there? How did Secretary of State Blinken get owned so badly? Dan.
Well, it was complete amateur hour at the summit. So what happened is Blinken opened with a statement of what they're going to cover on the agenda, and it sounded like somebody talking to their naughty child or something. Come here to the United States, and then we're going to cover every one of your domestic issues. You've been bad. And the Zhang Jieju, which is the foreign minister, blew up. Like he had as a normal 2-minute protocol to respond. He took 16 minutes. This has gone viral, accusing the United States of so many things. It's gone viral all over China. The first thing everybody was talking about is why the person next to Blinken has purple hair. That went crazy in China. They think the United States is not serious. I mean, for me, it's okay, but in China, if you have purple hair, it's a sign of mental instability. So that's what went viral first of all. Second was all the discussion. So China said, Blinken opens up with, you're creating global instability. The Chinese side comes back and just goes, global instability. Have you not heard of Libya? Have you not heard of Syria? Have you not heard of multiple color revolutions as you've been doing? The United States, and they quote, goes around the world using their military and financial hegemony, creating global instability. And the key point is he said, you have no right, you have no qualification to talk down to us about global instability. eyes at the U.S. side kind of went, wow, we're not used to having people talk back to us. So this is a country in China that doesn't need American capital. It doesn't need American technology. The export market to the United States, about 20% now of their exports, they could live without it. They've built a larger Navy. The U.S. has basically no military control now in the South China Sea or the East China Sea. So China's not afraid, and they're acting as equals, and they're telling them, you're going to treat us like equals or we're gone.
This has, been predicted by you and others over the past few years. We've been talking about this, the rise of China and how the U.S. seems really tone deaf to what's happening there. Now, unlike a lot of people who cover the space, you actually lived in China for 20 years, and you know Chinese. You can read the Chinese press. How did the Chinese press cover the summit?
Well, they're calling it China pulled their ace card, basically. It's very positive light. They like the way the foreign ministers handled the discussion. Formally, the government is saying talking's better than not talking. We'll be talking again. Hopefully, there is some type of reset. But China's not going to play number two. What you saw here is wolf warrior diplomacy, what they call it. It's been a focus for 2-3 years that they're going to get much more aggressive and stand up for themselves in the global, propaganda that's been getting directed against them on things like Xinjiang.
A day after this diplomatic disaster in the Alaska summit, Biden fell 3 times while trying to climb the stairs of Air Force One. And that's not a good look, certainly. How did that play in China?
Well, you can imagine it's also gone viral in China. People are saying, is this America? They can't even climb as stairs anymore. It's kind of a joke in China.
Right. I guess it's better than Bush #1. I believe he threw up on the Japanese leader during his tenure. So they should count themselves lucky that at least he didn't.
And had a shoe thrown at him.
Yeah, he had that Bush too had the shoe thrown at him. Right. So this is actually an improvement. Falling down or up the stairs of Air Force One is we're making progress over here. So now officials this week in the U.S. said that China was seeking, quote, economic dominance, and that this makes them a threat to the U.S. I don't get it. Of course, China is seeking economic dominance. What kind of statement is that? Does the U.S. think that they own the world or something? It seems pretty. Does the U.S. understand what the meaning of competition means? It's such a dumb statement. Is this saber-rattling way of saying that China is outcompeting us? What's going on there, Dan?
China's outcompeted us in every facet. Now they're technically ahead of us. 5G, mobile payments, infrastructure. They have a train that goes 1,100 kilometers in 4 hours. That's like Boston to Chicago, 4 hours. And our Amtrak does it in 23 hours. Their infrastructure is all brand new cities. So they're cleaning our clocks. They've done this behind very high tariff trade barriers. So we've gone decades where our goods to them are 40% duties and their goods to us are 2% duties. And then we look around and wonder, what happened. But so we're just at the precipice of this. We've been outcompeted. This is nothing you can turn around in a day. It's going to take a long time to get U.S. manufacturing back, and it doesn't change overnight.
Let's talk a slightly different take on this. China is starting to crack down on their domestic internet behemoths like Alibaba and Ant Financial, Baidu, Tencent, and others. These companies are far ahead of their global competition in terms of fintech innovation. Will that innovation die with this crackdown? In other words, they're trying to strike a balance here. Is that going to work, Dan?
I don't believe it'll die completely. These companies, and especially the big two, the Alibaba and the Tencent, have been dominating the new tech economy of China. They became so powerful through firms like Ant Financial, which is owned by Alibaba. They were sucking up 30 to 40% of global savings out of the banking system. So it was just a matter of, they started buying up media. They basically, any new type of startup comes up, they buy it. So these companies just became much, much too powerful. And now China's was forced to, after the banking system, virtually got put into Ant Financial, they had to do something. So they're trying to create that balance now as we speak.
Yeah, one thing that doesn't make any sense to me is that the the Biden administration is saying, hey, China, are you trying to outcompete us or what? And instead of unleashing American entrepreneurs in America, it looks like America is going to follow China in censoring big tech. Like, if America wants to be America, shouldn't they not follow China in kind of the censoring crackdown, Dan?
Yeah, we have we're going to have to get our own game plan together. And I think a lot of that's going to be decentralization. If you look at a few of the promising areas of the United States economy, electric vehicles with Tesla, SpaceX, Bitcoin, changing money. These areas are decentralizing using American creative ingenuity and genius. We're going to have to look for all solutions to the economy around this type of area. And we can outcompete China, but it's not going to be done by the old playbook. We've got to take new ideas on this.
Right. I remember back in the 80s when it was the story on Wall Street, when I was working on Wall Street, that Japan was going to take over the world and the U.S. had to get used to being number two. And then they unleashed the internet, and Japan could not really do what America did on the internet, and that was to create all these world-class internet companies through the magic of American entrepreneurialism. And so then we had a huge 1990s in the U.S. So it seems like the Biden administration should go back to that as the playbook and say, hey, wait a minute, we Americans are entrepreneurial. We need to give them freedom. That's what it says in the frickin' Constitution, freedom. Don't follow in the censoring footsteps. Now, as you point out, these corporations in China were indeed growing more powerful than the state. And the U.S. now has a similar situation post-World War II. And the government here in the U.S., they seem to have conceded the fact that they just don't have any power over these companies to do anything, or no game plan to do anything. How do you, if you were advising this current administration, what would be your 3-point plan?
Well, I think, as you point out, Max, we struggle with recognizing monopolies when they're in plain sight. We didn't do anything with Microsoft in the 90s when they were basically a monopoly. We've got Google today, which is an absolute monopoly in search. We've got Amazon, which is quickly becoming a monopoly. So there needs to be obviously government action around that. What that entails, I think they need to have a study and look at it. I don't know if it means breaking it up, or it means trying to understand how these companies became so powerful to begin with. Obviously, you want ingenuity, and you want, I think these are great companies that some of these companies have been put together, but as long as they're in monopoly positions, it is going to stifle innovation. And that's one area why, China is winning the war in a lot of tech now. Our fastest growing social media platform in the United States is TikTok, which is done out of Shanghai. Zoom is done by a Chinese immigrant to the United States. So we're also losing that side of the game. So we're not even keeping up in that area as much as we were, as you mentioned, in the 90s and noughts for software. But we need to look at where we're starting from today and how we get to a better point, because obviously something's gone wrong. 90% of our semiconductors are imported. 90% of the fish we consume is imported. Those two things don't seem linked, but they are. It's called government mismanagement. Americans can't make anything anymore, and they need to get down to the root cause of what's causing that.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up these points. In other words, you've got some similarities, some differences. What we would criticize in China as authoritarianism is replicated in the U.S. as monopoly. But the net effect is pretty much the same. You're giving absolute power to a Politburo, if you will, of some tech companies. And the result is stagnation and innovative stagnation. And we've had this experience in the U.S. of having monopolies, under Teddy Roosevelt, the trust buster. He went in there, and also, I believe, in the previous administration under Trump, hinted at this idea that they were going to break up the monopolies. Never got a chance to do it. But wouldn't that be the simplest way to crack open the entrepreneurialism in America? Just say, you know what, we're actually going to do the Teddy Roosevelt play. We're going to break up the monopolies, and we're going to let freedom ring. Dan?
I think it's probably the only solution. If you've got 90% market share in search, which Google has, I mean, their main competitors just type Google in the search engine. So it probably does need to be broken up, and we need to figure out how to do that. We need to keep, normally monopolies don't develop just by themselves. It's usually due to some type of government regulation that creates that. So we need to figure out what's going on and get it fixed.
Also, on the social front, it seems like the U.S. is moving toward a more Chinese style of collectivism and eschewing the idea of individuality, right? So American is really more of individual sovereignty, and whereas China is more of the collective. And again, the U.S. should break away from trying to get into the social justice warrior collective and just go back to what it does best, individual sovereignty. But Dan, as always, well worth the conversation to bring us up to date. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thanks very much.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. Want to thank our guest, Dan Collins. Until next time, bye, y'all.